Good afternoon. Greetings. Glad to see you all here. Thank you for coming. I'm Tom Kraus. I'm the chair of the committee that puts this together, and we're really pleased that you're here. By the way, there are restrooms outside that door and to the right in case you need them. I just want to give you a very brief summary of this Chautauqua project and say a word about the immigration issue, and then I'll introduce our moderator. So the purpose of this Ojai Chautauqua is to provide you the best information that we can on important and controversial issues. We're not trying to convince you about any particular point of view. We're not trying to cause you to take political action of some kind or another. We're simply trying to open up and illuminate the issue that we're speaking about. And we select these issues based on input from you and on what's current, what's going on in the world, and what's of concern, and what's complex and hard to get at and hard to really understand what is at stake and why people disagree. We strive to bring you a panel that represents a broad diversity of positions and points of view on the subject. So we select panelists for their expertise and for that they represent some kind of a perspective that is important. That's the kind of diversity that we are interested in. Our country has a long history of struggle with the issue of immigration. On the one hand, we're a nation of immigrants and proud of it. On the other hand, we have great difficulty arriving at a governing policy for immigration. And you might wonder, why is that? Why is it that it's so difficult? There's a wonderful new play on Broadway now called Alexander Hamilton. I'm sure some of you have seen it or read about it in the New Yorker. It's been written up, and actually there was a piece by Peggy Noonan in yesterday's Wall Street Journal about the play. It's the story of Alexander Hamilton. As you know, of course, he was one of the founders of our country. He was a deep thinker with enormous influence and was formational in our constitutional way of government. He was also an immigrant. Historians have wondered how it happened that an immigrant with no standing, no money, no family, no background, like Hamilton, could do what he did. And this play is an attempt to show that, to show how it is that he rose. In the words of the playwright, how does a bastard, orphan, and son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence, impoverished in squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? Now, I'd like to read you a statement about immigration. Quote, "The safety of a republic depends on the exemption of the citizens from foreign bias and prejudice. The United States has felt the evils of incorporating a large number of foreigners into their national mass." That statement was written by Alexander Hamilton. So the issue of immigration seems to reach very deeply into our values, but in conflicting ways. We value upward mobility. Regardless of how much money you have or who your parents are or what your social standing is, there is something wonderful about the opportunity being given to you to rise and succeed, and we all value that. We value the influx of new ideas that immigration brings. At the same time, we want to protect and preserve what we have: our environment, our way of life, our economic system. And that also seems worthy. In fact, it seems like it's our responsibility. So how do we think about this issue? Is it about economics and the environment, or freedom of opportunity and compassion for people? Is it about what we gain from immigration or what we lose? Is our obligation to the best interest of the country or to the best interest of the individual that wants to live here? I don't know that we'll answer all of these questions today, but I think our objective will be to give you a way to understand those issues more deeply. So before I introduce our moderator, I want to say we welcome your questions. There are cards and pens out on all of the seats. Please write down your questions, put your name on the card, and we'll have people walking around through the panel, picking them up and getting them up to the front. Our moderator today is Dr. Herb Gooch. He's a professor of political science at Cal Lutheran University. I won't read you his bio, but let me just say he's a frequent moderator of discussions about political issues. He is well known and highly thought of in the community, and I can tell you from my own experience talking with him about the immigration issue that he is an accomplished, thoughtful, and balanced thinker. We're delighted to have you here. Please welcome Dr. Herb Gooch.
All that, and I don't even owe him any money. Not bad. Thank you to Tom and Kid and Andy and the organizers of this event. The Chautauqua series of talks, at its best, promises not a destination but a voyage, an intellectual voyage to explore things. So, with that in mind, what we're going to do is start with a series of questions, and hopefully that will generate some discussion between the various members of the panel. I'm not going to take the time to spell out their biographies. We have a series of slides that are going to process through so that you can notice those, and in the interest of saving time instead of everybody's bio, what I'd like to do is really to start in with questions. And the first question I'd like to put for each of the panelists to respond as shortly as possible, not more than a couple of minutes each, is how is it that you got to this point in your interest with regard to immigration? Maybe start.
So you mean the personal perspective and not how we came to the views that we have?
Personally.
Yeah, well, there are different ways to answer that, and I think it's an important question because I think it does influence everything that we do, at least as a starting point. So I'm from an immigrant family. My family moved to America when I was 3 years old. Oh. Okay, that's interesting because I've got a lot of monitor up here. Okay, is that better? Yes. Okay. So I am from an immigrant family, and my family came to the United States when I was 3 years old. I grew up in San Francisco, so I think that this certainly has an influence deep down in my engagement with this, and that's at a personal level. At a professional level, I started teaching law at the University of Colorado in Boulder in the 1980s, and I went into immigration about 5, 6, 7 years into my academic career. In some ways, it's a second academic career, and I think it's because at that time, immigration was not the hot topic in the academy as it has become, and I realized that there was a real need for people to step in and not just try to take political positions, try to sort out why people agree and disagree. And so I've tried to do that. I certainly have my own views on this, but I think my principal goal in this is to look at this and try to answer the question, why is it that people disagree so much about that? And as an academic, I find that a very challenging, intriguing exercise.
We're struggling with the sound here.
Oh, yeah, because our monitor level is quite high up here, so
You can just move this in closer to my throat. Or is she now talking?
okay. Does that work better? I mean,
Is that better?
okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I mean, I'm getting a very high level in my own ear here.
Yeah, we're getting lots of noise here, so you
Right.
tell us.
Right. Okay. It's like being in a band. I mean, you know. Okay.
Senor?
Now,
Can you hear us now?
We get, let's do this. Why don't we go ahead and skip you, go here,
oh yeah,
and then Andy, if you could help him. Yeah.
you can hear me now?
Okay, go ahead.
Perfect. Great. So my name is Arsenio Lopez. It's pretty high from here. So I'm from Oxnard, and I'm originally from the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. I'm native person, Mixteco myself. I don't know you know about Mixtecos, but we are about 20,000 indigenous people living here in Ventura County. A lot of us, we are Mixtecos, Zapotecs, Nahuatl, Amuzgos, Zapotecos, Waves, a lot of Mesoamerican culture here we have in our backyards. And a lot of us, we do work, labor. So I came in 2003, and I think it's just because of my experience as an immigrant, I got involved with immigration issues. Um, or getting I realized that I had to be learning about kind of the same point, trying to see why there's a lot of negative perspective about immigration, and um, that's how I came right here. Like I said, I was a farm worker in 2003. Um, so in the professional level, I got involved with a nonprofit organization that is called Mixteco Indigena Community Organizing Project, and it's a nonprofit working for the indigenous people in Ventura County, and we have various type of programs. So I do speak no Spanish. Well, now I speak Spanish, but my language is not Spanish as my first language. My language is Mixteco, and Mixteco from Spanish is kind of the similar. I would just compare from Navajo language to English. So it's totally different language, and it's not a dialect from the Spanish. It's an indigenous, so it's a native language. Just in the country of Mexico, we have 68 different indigenous nations. And I don't know if you are aware of how many indigenous or native groups do you have here from this country, as we should remember, all of us, all this America is being built by immigrants. And I think that the first group that, they were here is the native people. And it's kind of the similar background in Mexico. So for the last 20 years, there's a lot of numbers of indigenous immigrants start coming to the USA. So I will talk a little bit more in details about my community, just because I want to be very brief.
Welcome to 2 hours of sound checks. Can you hear me? So I get wearing a T-shirt. I can't get it up close, though. Any better? I come at immigration from a population environmental perspective. That's what drew me to the issue. Some of you in the audience are probably like me. Were around for the first Earth Day in 1970. We worked on a lot of different environmental issues. It soon became apparent to me, it became apparent to a lot of us, that the most pressing environmental problem was population and population growth. And at that time, the United States population was, immigration levels were much lower. Population growth in the United States was mostly due to what we call natural increase, more births than there are deaths. About that same time, there was a lot going on in the 70s. A lot going on in the 70s. The fertility rate dropped considerably in the United States, as it did in other industrialized countries. Pardon me? For whom? For the United States. Until essentially since the 1970s, we had what we call replacement level fertility, about 2 children per woman, so that the population would stabilize were it not for immigration, and particularly the increases in immigration since then. Okay, so the population would have stabilized by now from had it not been for the increases in immigration and the continuing immigration, because we have a replacement level fertility rate, as do most other industrialized countries. And the problem with population growth is a loss of habitat for other species. We'll talk about that some more later, and I have slides to show with that. Having become interested in the issue from that perspective, then I also looked at the other impacts, the economic impacts, the impacts on education, and I think we'll discuss some of those, and I have my own perspective on those. But as far as how I got into it, I spent most of my adult life doing work for nonprofits in the environmental field. I used to be an attorney, so I have that background. And I have other vices, but I'm no longer an attorney.
Thank you very much, Herb. Can you all hear me all right? I've been told that I don't normally need a microphone, so if I speak too loud, give me a thumbs down. To start with, I want to introduce my wife, who's here today with me, as she normally is. We're both natives of Los Angeles County. She's from Inglewood. I was born and raised in East LA, in an area that many refer to as a barrio. And it was a very strong part of my roots. In 1967, we moved to Ventura County, where we've lived now for 47 years. Never in my wildest dream did I ever think that I would find myself involved in any form of public service, or particularly elected office. And I got involved kind of innocently when I took on City Hall over what I thought was not representative government. Lo and behold, the next thing I knew, I was the mayor of the city. It was kind of a fluke. Well, 6 years later, there was a vacancy in the House of Representatives, and I was asked by some if I would consider it. And I had been intrigued a great deal with Washington through my involvement as the mayor of the city of Simi Valley. So, lo and behold, never expecting that I would really be elected, I did, and I had the honor of serving for the next 26 years, including the city of Ojai for all of those terms. The question that Herb asked, and by the way, Herb is a large reason that I accepted this invitation today, because I have so much respect for Herb Gooch. Although we don't always agree on issues, he's an honorable guy, and he would be even-handed, I know, in making sure that things were presented in an even-handed way. The question that he asked, if I understood correctly, is what caused you to get involved in the issue of immigration? Well, it was a very innocent situation. One of the things that members of Congress do is provide for constituent services. And we had a call one day from the mayor of the city of Agoura Hills, who was also in the district, very, very upset. The constituents there were livid because of a day worker site that was causing people not to go into certain businesses because of certain activities. And I looked into it, got local authorities involved. And the more that I got involved in the issue, the more I tried to study the issue. I became the first Republican, or the first non-lawyer in history to be appointed to the Judiciary Committee, and that was done in a bipartisan way by a Republican and Democrat chairman and ranking member, and I served on that committee for 24 years. To start with, I acknowledge, and I think that there's probably very few people in this audience that doesn't believe that we are a country of immigrants. That's what America is. We are a country of immigrants. But we are also a nation of laws. And without laws, you can't have organized and fair immigration. We allow more people the legal right to immigrate to this country than any other country in the world. And I wholeheartedly support that. But as my involvement progressed, I really tried to find solutions to where we could have a form of legitimate comprehensive reform. And there have been a lot of things that were written about me come election time. It clearly wasn't true, but I'd be happy to address any of those questions. Number one, I am an advocate of immigration. I'm also a very strong advocate of the rule of law. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons that I was invited to this today, to enter into where we are. Clearly, the status quo is not working. Is it a political reason it's not working, or is it two sides that are diametrically opposed about the process? And I think it's probably a little of both. But anyway, we're going to have a chance to get into that. I don't know if that answers the question, Herb. If it doesn't, tough.
My name's Avi Kingston. I come from a somewhat different perspective. I'm an immigration lawyer, and it's what I've done my entire career now for 35 years. My job is to immigrate people and prevent people from being removed from the United States. It's something that I've worked at diligently in this area for 35 years.
Could we get slide 5 up? Let me start with a quote and let that frame my question. The quote is actually from George Bush in 2005. It concludes, "The system regarding immigration is not working. Our nation needs an immigration system that serves the American economy and reflects the American dream." Let's assume for the moment we can all agree, whatever else is going on, the system for legal and illegal isn't working. And
Can't hear you.
let's assume for the moment that we can agree the system at large is not working. The question then that I would put to the panel is, if it is supposed to, any reform would have at least two components in its goals. One is to serve the American economy. The other is to serve the American dream. To what extent are those mutually exclusive? Can you do both at the same time if you embark on an effort at comprehensive reform?
This is the economy and the American economy and the American dream.
To what extent do they conflict as goals?
Well, that's, of course, I'm going to give you kind of a lawyerly answer to start with, which is what do we mean, by the American dream? I think that's a lot of what's at stake here, right? I mean, I suppose if the point of the question is, in some sense, to kind of get me to sort of articulate some deeper values here, I mean, I think that a lot of my perspective on the immigration system is that this country, in order to serve the American dream, needs to have a robust economy. I think it needs to have an economy that grows. I think that the economy has, and the rules that the government has for trying to regulate the economy has to accept some things as beyond the power of the federal government to control. For example, forces of globalization, things of that nature. I mean, we can talk about that, and we can have views on whether outsourcing is good or outsourcing is bad. But I think that's the kind of thing that it's very difficult for the American economy, for the federal government to really have a planned economy sort of thing. So I think that one of the things that's important for pursuing some vision of a robust America is to have a strong economy. And I think it is important that the immigration system be aligned much more than it is with the needs of the economy. And probably the biggest problem we have right now is that we have very few opportunities compared to earlier times in American history come to this country to work if you don't have a college degree. And I know it's nice and it's good to think we really want to welcome Nobel Prize winners and the people who are highly trained. I think that's true. But the fact of the matter is there's a big mismatch between the apparent needs of the economy and the legal immigration. And I think that's a lot of the source of the unauthorized migration we have in this country is because of that mismatch. You know, I suppose you could say, well, you know, you could stop them from coming in. But the fact of the matter is, I think that the employer community is very strong. And I think that it is right to have a workforce that that leads to a strong economy. And so in that sense, I think that the American economy, what serves the American economy, I'm not really trying to take the position that what's good for General Motors is good for America, but I do think that we have to have an adaptive economy and one that is really in some ways in a different world climate than it was 10, 20, 50 years ago.
Yes.
Let me ask, when you answer,
Or should we use it? Would it help if we all use this like as handhelds? Because these are okay. These are very unidirectional mics. I mean, they're.
just if you hold it when you answer, just actually hold it, just like you're doing, then we can hear it fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Arsenio.
Great. Well, this is how it comes with the microphones. So
Testing your reflexes.
I will try to answer the question, but I will be very honest to you all. I don't have economics background on terms with related to the questions. That's the first thing. But I think that just thinking about the USA economy and the American dream, um, a lot of we, the immigrant population that we are in Ventura County, I would just say that Ventura County is a very agriculture county. And there is a big, I think it's a business of $2 billion, dollars or billions agriculture business. And a lot of the immigrant population here, they're contributing to that economy. We are young immigrant population that is coming. With respect to the elders, I don't see like a big population of the immigrants being above 40 or 50 years old. They're pretty young generations. And what we do as a young generation, I think that what we do is a lot of work in agriculture. You know, we're part of this economy, and we as immigrants, we come right here because we have dreams. A dream for a better life, a dream for a better education for our kids, for our children, for our families. That's why we are coming right here. But once we get here in this country, at least in my personal experience, I think a lot of the immigrants start thinking, well, is this a really the country where I can dream? Especially if you are an undocumented person, if you don't have like a path or a process to be able to get your work permit. And I totally can get and understand about well, so why you come then if you don't go through the process of getting your visa or getting your work permit or at least a visa, a worker visa. The news with that is that there is not such a process. That I know there is not such a process for our families where we're coming from, where they can go to the USA Embassy in Oaxaca or in Guerrero and Michoacán and Jalisco and Guanajuato, all these main states where a lot of these people comes from. I'm talking as a Mexican too. There is not such a process for, the immigration system is broke from my point of view. So when we come right here, we have to find a way to get here. But when we get here, we just go entirely to the work and the agribusiness, and that's how I feel we're contributing to this country. A lot of us we come, we don't come with a college degree, to be honest. very few population comes with a college degree. We come with a vision of being working as farm workers. And a lot of our people come to Ventura County, and then they stayed for a season, for a very short of time, and a lot of them, they moved to the north of California. Some of them, they moved to Washington State. Some of them, they moved to Oregon State. Some of them, they go to Florida. And a lot of the people also, they go to New York. And we're taking jobs, probably, I don't know if it's going to sound okay, but we're taking jobs, not away from people, that they want a job. We're taking jobs that other people don't want. Just if you drive, just take your time and just drive over Rice Avenue and Rose Avenue, all these agriculture fields there, and also on Guaneme Road, and just see how the companies are looking for workers. There is a shortage of workers now times. I don't know who's going to take those jobs. I don't know if the agriculture industry will be having a negative impact by not having enough workers. That is affecting the economy, I see. But there is no way, now that these billions and billions of dollars being invested on the border and investing on, and basically the borders, but still, to be honest, people still coming. So we need to do something for that, for the economy of this country, and as well for the hard-working people that are here already. Probably 12 million if we are talking about a number, I think is the conservative number we're talking about.
Whenever we discuss economics and economic studies, I'm reminded of the story of the shipwreck and the two engineers and an economist washed up on the deserted island, and along with from the ship there was a case of beans, and they thought, well, we'll have food at least. And the one engineer was thermal engineer, and he said, I think we'll be able to build a fire, and they'll heat the can, and the metal will expand and explode, and then we'll be able to eat them. And the other civil engineer said, well, all we have to do is really get an object of sufficient force from a sufficient distance and drop a rock on it, and that will open the beans, and then we'll be able to eat them. And the economist says, well, my dear colleagues, so much trouble, all we have to do is assume we have a can opener, and then we'll eat the beans. And I think of this whenever I see economic studies, because you can find economic studies on both sides of the issue. I can cite you studies showing that immigration provides a detriment to the economy, and the other side can provide studies saying that no, we need it, and it helps the economy. But the fact is, it really doesn't make as much difference as one might think, because in a $17 trillion economy, immigration is the tail on the dog. It is not the dog. It makes a small difference. The right immigrants at the right time could be helpful. The wrong ones could be hurtful. And it's really just a matter of supply and demand. If you have an unlimited supply of workers, then it depresses wages. And I think this has been shown many times. George Borjas, who's a professor at Harvard and has been described by both the Wall Street Journal and Business Week as America's leading immigration economist, says, from his studies, it's clear that affluent Americans prosper from immigration and poor Americans suffer, because we get a lot of immigrants at the low end of the sector, and it's bound to depress wages. What we should do, if there's a labor shortage, is for wages to go up. That's how we built the middle class in this country. But if you have an unlimited supply of low-wage labor, then you have wage stagnation that we have now. Can I see slide 3? Are you able to pull that up? And we were talking about the immigration system being broken. And I can't see it. Is that a quote from Barbara Jordan? That's a different slide 3, my slide. Can we see slide 3 from the one that I sent?
Slide 3? Did you ask for slide 3?
Slide 3, but I sent you a packet of slides.
Oh, your slide, sorry.
Yeah. But, we're taught we should be studying finding solutions to the immigration problems, and we've done that. We had a commission on immigration reform that met for 5 years. It had dozens of hearings and studies and tabulations, and you can see what Barbara Jordan,
said at the conclusion of that hearing. She was the chair of the commission and sometimes known as the Jordan Commission. Another of her quotes was, immigration should serve the national interest, not the narrow interest of different groups, different business groups, different ethnic groups, but it should serve the national interest. And that's where and in fact, when the Jordan Commission called for a 1/3 reduction in legal immigration, rejected amnesty, called for strict enforcement of laws against illegal immigration, made the recommendations. President Clinton said, his press secretary said, I agree with you, we're going to start with the reductions. But instead, the study was put on the shelf, and so we're having the same problems now that we would have been resolved if we paid some attention to the work that was done by this prodigious study some years ago.
Thank you. Elton?
First of all, can you hear me without using this?
No, they need you for taping purposes.
Just project. Okay, I probably would agree with you. Is this tolerable? It isn't tolerable. Okay. The microphone is here. Want to use this one? Okay, is that better? Or just find it? Okay. Herb's question relating to the American dream and the American economy. I can speak, first of all, as an example of probably many that are here today. How many are parents in here that have maybe grown children? Okay. Janice and I have 4 grown adults with college degrees. My proudest moment in life is being able to get my kids through school, and they've been great young people. The challenges that this nation faces today is beyond the challenges that my wife and I faced 50 years ago. They're all struggling, and they all have jobs. The American economy is dependent on any number of things. Immigration certainly plays a role in that. But there's a reason that we have immigration laws. Now, are they written correctly? Probably not as well as they could be, but if they're not, let's change them. But let's not just selectively decide which laws we're going to enforce and which laws we don't want to deal with because of political reasons and so on and so forth, by executive order or whatever else. The American dream is what our children and our grandchildren are looking to. The American dream. Immigrants play a role in that, but it cannot be an unlimited check to open borders. It's amazing to me how we're talked about all the time through our president and so on about how much people dislike us around the world. If that's really the case, why are so many people trying to get in legally or illegally? I think maybe the answer is we still are kind of the dream location to many all around the world. But can we absorb all of the costs without doing it in a balanced way? When you take a look at the entitlements and $18 trillion of debt and growing faster than the second hand on the clock running, we need to look at that as a part of immigration reform. We're the most generous nation, in my mind, of any nation in the world, and I support that. But our generosity has to be calculated a little better than it is now, not because we are insensitive, but because we are sensitive, so that our children and grandchildren of all colors and all ethnic backgrounds can live the American dream.
My perspective is somewhat different. I don't think that we are in a position to have comprehensive reform agreed upon on a national basis. But I do believe that the steps that the administration is trying to take and has taken have really proved effective. Implemented in 2012, the DREAM Act, the so-called DREAM Act. When children were brought here under age 16, They can now avoid deportation. They don't obtain immigrant cards. It's not an amnesty, but their life has changed. They're able to continue their education. They're able to get driver's license, Social Security cards. They've been very productive members of the community, of the nation. The complementary proposal was DAPA, that would allow parents of U.S.-born children or permanent residents to reside here legally or avoid removal for a period of 3 years. The litigation is pending. There was an injunction granted in Texas. It's in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals now for review. But that will be a significant step forward, as I see it, to addressing the immediate problems that we face as a nation. A taller fence, a longer fence is just not any kind of real solution. And it's also not just a problem from Mexico or Central America. It's not. The problem of immigration addresses all countries. I agree, there should be a rule of law. Everybody would agree on that. But simply the executive action taken by President Obama, if implemented, is the rule of law. And that avoids many millions of people from being removed from the United States. That would then be the rule of law. The other impact that we see, or I see as a practical matter, is skilled labor in the United States. I believe most people know what the H-1B program is. There's a real limitation. Right now, there's a lottery. There are roughly 65,000 H-1B visas available to specialty workers who have degrees, technical degrees, as a general rule. There's 65,000 available. The number of applicants is 185,000 or more. No one knows this year. But we see that companies that want that skill set are not trying to circumvent immigration law. They're not trying to immigrate or help their neighbor. They're willing to go to great lengths, great expense to bring in someone who could help the U.S. economy, who could help their country. Those are small steps that I think will really address the problem. We saw in 1986 the legalization program, and I personally feel that it was a failure. That was a comprehensive attempt. At the one hand, for the first time, implemented a program of employer sanctions with the thought that that would be the draw if you could eliminate the jobs. And at the same time, it legalized some 12 million people in the United States. But now, some 35 years later, we still have the same problem. We have 12 million undocumented people, and most people would agree the employer sanction provision has not been rigorously enforced. So I believe the only solution we have is a piecemeal approach to the problem. The deferred action, the DAPA, the DACA programs are programs that work on a local and national level. The debate about immigration has gone on for years and years with very difficult to come to a comprehensive reform. Everybody would, I believe, agree that enforcement of a longer wall has not worked. So the approach that I would recommend would be piecemeal, taking or following the steps that the administration is trying to take.
Following up on this, take a look at there's really sort of two parts. It's very easy to get off on thinking of immigration and thinking of the dimension of the illegals or undocumented, but most of what you mean by immigration policy in the United States refers to our legal system. What would you say, I'm going to start over with Hiroshi again, what would you say we're doing right in our legal immigration setup?
Well, there's a couple ways to think about. There's basically four ways that people come to the country legally. One is they have family ties. another is through jobs, another is through refugees and asylum, and another is through a lottery, which is a small number of people, relatively speaking. So I think that the family, I think that the family categories make sense. I mean, I think that this isn't just a matter of the humanitarian aspects of this, which of course are very important, but of course families work, and I think that one of the things that you have to think about in immigration policy is how do immigrants become Americans, how do they contribute, and I think that bringing in people who have the family ties to give them a foothold in this country, give them a base to contribute and become members of society, that I think that works. I also think that a lot of the employment categories work to the extent that they mean that folks come to the country and they have jobs and they contribute to the economy. You know, my main concern, as I mentioned earlier, is that there's a mismatch in many parts of the economic sector. And I'm not sure, you know, you didn't really ask about the unauthorized population. You know, I think it's fair that you asked about the lawful thing, the lawful aspect of this. But, you know, if I could step slightly outside your question, or at least think about your question, I think it's really interesting that it may be a mistake to divide the discussion into sort of the lawful immigration system and the unauthorized, illegal, or undocumented system. And I'll tell you why. Is because we have a system that says there's some lines to stand in, and for a lot of folks there's no line to stand in. And so in some sense it's all created by the legal system that we have. And so, you know, I think one of the things, and I'll pass along the mic because I want to keep my answer crisp here, but I think that we really ought to talk about why we have 11 million, 12 million people in the country. I mean, I think that's very much, you know, in a sense, your question asks us to bracket that off to the side, but in some senses, it's very much a logical consequence at some level of intentionality of many Congresses over many generations. We ought to talk about that, because I think a lot of the reason people disagree, frankly, is different interpretations of that history, and that might be worth talking about too.
Can you repeat one more time that question?
Looking at the legal aspects of our immigration system, I'll shift it around a little bit. Do you have any optimism? What do you think we're doing right?
Well, I don't know if else under the question, but I think that's something that is, at least a discussion is going on there. There's a good intention about following the process and creating the process about the 12 million people in this country that is undocumented. In terms with the, I know there is some opportunities for you to come legal in this country. However, it applies only for specific countries. We know that the immigration is not only for Mexican immigrant people in this country, but also for the whole world of people coming to the United States. But for Mexico, I don't know why there is every time you talk about immigration, it's related to Mexico, and you think about Mexican people coming right here. But there is a very strict process for Mexican people in terms with policies, in terms with legal process. It's tough, but at least the one good thing that is there, that is for those first wave of immigrants that they were able to get their documents with the ERCA. Probably they were not a good law or a good decisions to provide documents to undocumented population in the 86, 87, but still a lot of this first wave for people getting their documents, there's a process for their families to reunify them with those people living here. But it's still, that is good, the good thing that we're doing, but it takes forever. If you are a lawful, legal person who is here, you are petitioning for your family members to come over here. That is a very strict policy or rules in order to bring your families. Sometimes you have to be waiting for 10 or 20 years to be able to bring your family members. The process is there, that's good. The other thing that I'm thinking about what we're doing good is about this DACA and DAPA. Hopefully, it's gonna happen and will benefit a lot of undocumented population there who we're talking about the first, second generations probably, of these youth that they came very little when they were probably 3 or 4 years, and they were through the whole education system already. They are skilled people. They are very talented, but until before the 2012, they were not able to get a work permit to be able to use their skills to the economy of this country. But at least the good thing is that they were able, a big number of this population, they were able to get this social security number and start being part of this next workforce to contribute to this county. So I think that's a good thing. At least for California, I think that was mentioned already about the driver license. It's very important for to make sure that our people that are driving there in the roads, on our roads, that they know the law about driving, instead of having them driving without not knowing the law, the regulations. That is safe for everyone. So I think that is another thing good that I see for California.
I'm usually not in the business of saying what's right about immigration, so I'll struggle here. But I think, I mean, there are many success stories of individuals. Many of us probably know immigrants. Years ago, when I was seeking a housemate, I interviewed people and selected a Muslim immigrant, and he became a good friend, and I learned a lot about him and his culture. So there are a lot of success stories. I think one of the problems is we sometimes, mix up forest and trees, and so we can cite specific examples and think that's wonderful, and then we sort of miss the bigger picture where there'll be a negative amorphous impact that is spread across many people in terms of depressed wages, as I mentioned before, while there will be individual successes for immigrants who are able to make it. But again, my perspective is more on the on the overall numbers, and that troubles me so much. I mean, one thinks about it, there in this country, in any country, in all the cosmos, there are only two possible immigration policies, and those are some restrictions or no restrictions. And what this country selected, what every country in the world has selected, is some restrictions. Once you have that, I think you should first start with what the number should be, rather than just say, well, this group wants this one group wants that one, business wants this, agriculture wants that, and then it just adds up. I think we'd be better start and look at the limits on resources, see what the number is. Once you have the number of immigrants, then you have to make the tough decision about who gets to come, and the third decision is how do you enforce those laws.
And by the way, you can, if you have questions, write them. They could be directed to the panel as a whole or to any individuals, and Kit could come around and pick them up.
Thank you, Herb. I will try to make this as short as possible and stay on point. But since two of our board members mentioned a number, I really would like to, I won't set the record straight because I'm not capable of setting the record straight, but the number 12 million people in this country illegally was mentioned by both the professor and with my able lawyer appropriately on my left, is that no one knows what that number is, but I would just ask you to think about this for a second. 10 years ago, LULAC, MALDEF, La Raza all agreed pretty much in concert that 11 million was what the number was at that time. Now, these are the illegal immigrant advocates. If you can look at me and convince me that in the last 10 years we haven't had any increase in illegal immigration, no crossings, I'll accept the 12 million. Otherwise, I would say we really don't know. Now, back to the issue of what's working with legal immigration. By and large, I think the legal immigration issue, while somewhat controversial with some, by and large, it's working. There are a couple issues that I take exception with, and one, as the professor mentioned, is the lottery system. The lottery system, in my opinion, as just one member of this group, is an absolute fraud and makes no sense whatsoever. The other issue is the intellectual honesty on the financial declaration of support by a sponsor. A family of 4 that has a gross income of, I believe it's $28,000 a year, and you correct me if I'm wrong on that, plus or minus $28,000 a year, can qualify to sponsor an adult person to come to this country and be totally financially responsible for all of their expenses. Correct? Okay. I think we need to either change that number or acknowledge that, as Janet Reno said to me in a meeting about 10 years ago when I asked her the question, is this contract that you signed with the sponsor, is this a legal contract? And if so, why isn't it enforced? And her answer to me is, yes, it is a legal contract. However, we view this as a moral obligation, and that's the reason we're not sponsoring it. That's one of the problems. By and large, the numbers are based on, I think, sound information. But again, the problem and the controversy that most of us are wrestling with here isn't the legal immigration, but it's the illegal immigration, if for nothing more than the rule of law.
From my perspective, looking at what's good, and I think there is a lot of good recently, in California, Assembly Bill 60 that provides everybody could get a driver's license, even if you're undocumented, seems like a common sense idea. We have a population that will be tested, insured, and they will have to follow a rule of law, but they're eligible. Also, Assembly Bill AB 540 that allowed undocumented people who have lived here for a particular period of time to enroll in college and pay resident student fees. I think that is a small step, but an important step. What I see Homeland Security has done most effectively is enforcement. The U.S. really now knows when everybody leaves the country and when everybody returns. The level of control is really quite astounding. Because I'm old, I remember, going back to 1978 in the Iranian student hostage. What happened then, the president asked U.S. immigration for the list of Iranian students in the United States. How many foreign students were there in the United States? There was no record. How many of those students still were in valid status? Where were they going to school? There was no such record. But now USCIS really knows where everybody is at every particular moment. So if the question about enforcement, from my perspective, it is very rigorous. If we look at the number of border agents, they exceed the number of FBI, CIA, and alcohol and tobacco and firearm agents. A very well-funded group. There's no question. What also I believe has been effective, although maybe with some misuse, is the investor visa program, where individuals can invest in targeted areas, $500,000 to $1 million, and create 10 U.S. jobs. Many countries have used that program effectively, and I think the United States is starting to see the wisdom of following that, bringing in foreign capital, the requirement of creating jobs in the United States. What we see also is that immigrants who do immigrate are not entitled to benefits. When you immigrate somebody, there is no entitlement to Medicare or Medi-Cal. Those benefits are not available. So enforcement has been effective. I think that the waiting period for family unification is really a problem. Everybody will agree if you want to immigrate a family member and you have to wait 10 to 15 years or longer, it's not a vehicle. It's not a solution to any kind of problem. But I think steps have been made to reduce that backlog and make legal immigration more accessible to greater numbers of people?
Another question comes in relation to the search for some sort of comprehensive reforms. In your view, what is the major obstacle to finding some sort of comprehensive reforms? One party makes more noise about the issue, in particular focusing on need for wall and illegals, et cetera. But if you look carefully, the problems and the issue cuts across the parties. So why is it so difficult to fashion any kind of comprehensive reform?
I don't know, I was getting myself into this when I sat on the end of the seat here. So, testing my, these are not questions that we had any idea what they were going to be. So what are the obstacles? I mean, I can give you a political answer and I can give you a substantive answer. The political answer is I think that, that it's a very it's an issue on which particularly, I mean, Congressman is much more expert in this, obviously, than I am, but I think it's an issue on which you need to have a supermajority, certainly in the House, in the Senate as well. And by that, I just mean that it is possible for the passage of a bill to be blocked in a situation where I think immigration ends up becoming a good issue to run on in many districts. And so that's a cynical political answer, but I don't think you're asking, I think, for more of a substantive answer. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a certain degree of disagreement, maybe a serious disagreement about how we got to 11 million people. You know, my own view of this is that we got to 11 million, or conceding the imprecision of that, but it's large unauthorized population because of the mismatch between the legal system and the apparent needs of the economy. And so we have a system where admission to this country is very selective, but we don't have the political will, apparently, to enforce in a way that deprives of employers in the economy of a workforce. And I think a lot of that is because of, you know, my view, it's not a closed system where if you were to cut off immigration, you would raise wages necessarily, because we live in a global economy where a lot of this is whether the economy, American employers are going to be competitive worldwide, and the result of cutting off labor may well be to outsource or for businesses to go out of business. So at any rate, we have a mismatch between the economy and the law, and the result is that we essentially have, over time, tolerated a system. In fact, it's actually, I would say it's been actually our de facto government policy to look the other way in many circumstances. And then the result is that it's like that scene like that scene in the movie Casablanca where the police officer comes in and he's shocked that there's gambling in Rick's Cafe. You know, it's sort of, we're shocked and we look at it as an affront to the rule of law, that there are 11 million people in the country. And yet that is really the system that has been handed down. Not that anyone ever decided to vote on it that way, but that really is the system we've been handed down. And I think there's a real difference of opinion about that. I think that people who are for legalization or amnesty or whatever word you want to use think, okay, those are people who are, in a sense, de facto invited to this country to do the work, and so they have acquired some kind of rights or at least some kind of equities that ought to be respected through legalization. And yet, you know, on the other side, I think you would have people who think, and you know, I think there are reasonable sides on both sides of this, people who say, well, but they broke the law, and they really shouldn't be rewarded in some sense for that. And I think that's the reason that I think there's a real difference in the interpretation of history. You know, that's one thing. And then the only other thing I'll say, and this may seem overly philosophical, but I think it's worth throwing out there. I think that there's a difference between one group who is thinking and voting on these issues that really thinks about the rule of law as being the enforcement of the laws as written. And I understand that point of view, but if you think that the system in this country has been to really tolerate a situation that has gotten to 11 million, 12 million, whatever number of unauthorized migrants, then the real rule of law is to deal forthrightly with the circumstances that brought them to this country, and to say, even if you're going to go into a high enforcement regime going forward, that you ought to recognize the fact that this is the reason that people came to this country. And I think that ties back to, I think that the rule of law question, I think we've been talking about that, and I think there's a real contest over what the rule of law really means in this environment, and I also think there's a real contest about how we got here. And that's why I think reasonable people disagree about this issue, because I think it's possible to have a lot of honest disagreements about what the rule of law really means and how we got here. Is it law breaking, or is it really the way the system was actually going to operate? I'm just trying to lay out the both sides here. Okay.
Thank you. Maybe it's about political power, you know. There's a lot of, the way I'm seeing it too in the community is there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it really means comprehensive immigration reform. A lot of people interpret this as soon as you hear comprehensive immigration reform, you hear about amnesty. Are we going to give amnesty to these people, whatever the number are of undocumented here? What does that mean for this country? There's a lot of debates around, are we going to give them a path to citizenship? What does that mean? There's a lot of debates around, are these people are they coming to live in this country, or they're coming just for a very short period of time, come and work and then going back? A lot of debates of both, you know, from this both perspective about should we allow them to get into the citizen? We're gonna give them the green card. How long is gonna take them for be a citizen? So I'm not an expert on that, but that's how I see it. There's a lot of disagreements and political powers there. I can speak a little bit of why it's good to have a comprehensive immigration reform. I can just think two stories about people coming here. I mean, two families coming here in this country. There's families who they come without the documents here, and there's families that they were able, because of, I'm talking about this first wave of immigrants, that they were able to bring their families with their legal status, their work permit and all that. I see a big difference when you have these people having this access to the social security numbers in terms to be able to get jobs and being able to go to schools, being able to dream for going to the universities. And after 6, 7, 10 years, you will be seeing these people being working and contributing in a greater ways to the economy of this country. Meanwhile, if you're coming here as undocumented, your dream is very short. You come here just to see yourselves being working, or you have with your families, and not much about what else you can do, because you have a lot of limitations to keep moving on with that. Also, we have to understand about how complex is the immigration community, the immigrants communities. You have men who come in by themselves, and they have the whole family and their countries. They come here with the idea to work and going back. So it's going to be great if we can have kind of a process that will allow these men to come and work, and then they go back without fears, and coming back again for the next season and contribute to the economy of this country. We have also couples, young couples, that they don't have kids. They come in with the intention of work, and then going back to their countries. But also there's families who come over here, or parents who comes over here and they start having the kids. They want to see a way how they can stay here safe, and how they can be able to support their children to be able to go, you know, and having build their skills and getting to universities, because that's what I hear a lot of the cases, like these people, they come with they are non-skilled workers. Well, they can get the skills, and they come with the skills, they are contributing to agriculture. So I think it's, at the end, I think my answer is just, It's more about what's going to happen in the future in 10, 12, 20 years. What we're creating? Are we creating a whole bunch of citizens that later on they will be doing something else? I don't know.
I mentioned before the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform, and what's interesting when one looks at it from today's political perspective is that all of its recommendations, almost all of its recommendations were unanimous. 5 Democrats and 4 Republicans on the panel, a whole list of recommendations, including reducing immigration. And it's a little hard for us to see in these increasingly polarized times of Republicans and Democrats coming together in that. One of the problems is that, again, we're looking at it as a piecemeal approach. This group wants this immigrant group, this group wants tech workers, this wants agriculture, this wants family. And so you start adding all these things together, which I think is a backwards way of looking at it, rather than saying, well, we need to look at limits on resources, limits on infrastructure, the impact on education, and see how many people we can absorb. Start with that. Another issue is that there's just no trust, because look what happened in 1986. We had this incredible amnesty for 3 million people here illegally. Well, what happened? Illegal immigration increased. So now we have 12 million in the country illegally. I mean, there's no way to discourage illegal behavior by rewarding illegal behavior. It makes sense that, there'll be another amnesty in the future, which is what people are proposing now. So let's do the math. 25, 30 years from 3 million to 12 million, are we going to have an amnesty for 50 million in another 25 or 30 years? I mean, the classic definition of insanity is someone who repeats the same behavior and expects different results. And that's what we're doing now. And you can call it legalization or something other than amnesty, but if you look back at what happened in 1986 and look at the press coverage, New York Times coverage, whatever, I mean, then people were honest enough to call it amnesty. It's the same thing. People came here illegally, but now you're allowed to stay here. Get citizenship, work permits, or being rewarded. And so there is no trust. Why would we do that again?
1986, IRCA, the Immigration Reform Act, Simpson-Mazzoli. We had a little dialogue earlier this afternoon about that. On the surface, and Ronald Reagan was leading the charge for that. And on the surface, it looked like it was checks and balances. We're going to give amnesty, which was kind of a last resort way to solve the problem, so we thought. And the way they're going to balance it is we were going to have employer sanctions and stiff laws that would prohibit us from being in that position in the future. Unfortunately, the amnesty portion worked, but the implementation, by and large, for the enforcement has never really happened. Now, where are we today? The question was asked, is it political, is it special interest, whatever. The political part is a result of what the legislative and the executive branch can collectively agree on. In many ways, it's driven by the special interest, whether it's labor unions or whether it's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, whether it's one political party over another, whether it's agriculture, whatever the issue. But I firmly believe that if we take 10% of the people on this side of the aisle and 10% of the people on this side of the aisle, and we don't allow them to participate in the debate with the 75 or 80% in the middle, I think if we had a president and a Congress of the same party so we could eliminate some of the political maneuvering, we could collectively come up with an answer. It's very complex. There's no simple answers to it, but it's political, which is driven by special interest. And like Winston Churchill once said, this form of government is the worst in the world except for all the others.
I would agree that there is no simple solution, but I think already in place there are vehicles that will solve a lot of our problems. There are programs for seasonal agricultural workers, but they're very hard to work through. They're not user-friendly. They're very difficult to implement. They're programs from temporary workers, H-2B programs, but the numbers are used up. So the mechanism for legal immigration as well as the H-1B program. If those, I think people can agree, if we could balance the demand and the need, then we've gone a long way to solving the problems. The way the law is written now, there's a significant punishment for people who are in the United States illegally at this moment. Quotas are available, even if you look at the most common country, perhaps Mexico. The backlog on the visa bulletin for the availability of an immigrant card for someone who's a skilled worker from Mexico is only about 5 to 6 months. But the problem is the law that is currently written prevents anybody from benefiting from that if they are here illegally. So it's like more than a catch-22. It's an impossibility. So if someone is not in the country and seeks to enter, that person can relatively quickly legally immigrate, but that doesn't address the problem for the people who are here and undocumented. Those people suffer significantly because they don't have a vehicle for entering the country. So comprehensive immigration, very difficult to achieve, but I think the programs will, in my view, on a piecemeal approach, will really go a long way to solving our problems.
A little bit comprehensive. Could we see slide 7? That's a possibility. What slide 7 shows is the unauthorized immigrants into the United States on an ascending curve, hitting a height during about 2007 under George W. Bush's administration. Coincidentally, right about the time the economy collapsed, and then a fall off, and then a fairly even line from that point on, ending up with, and the figures vary, about 11 million, maybe as many as 14 million unauthorized immigrants. Could you comment on what do you think we should do with those unauthorized? No matter what reforms are going to be sought, you've got a huge number of people, and everyone's worst scenario of a photo op would be a child born in the United States, even though their parents are illegal, has then rights to be an American citizen, a child being left behind and deporting the parents. So politically, the optics couldn't be worse. What to do with those 14 million? That's the question. Your comment.
Well, my answer to your question, Herb, goes back to what I was trying to say earlier about why these numbers look the way they do. So, again, this is the controversy, or I think there's a great difference of opinion, which on the one hand, it would view the 11 million as lawbreakers who deserve to be punished, and the other view is a different view of the history, which is that they came under basically the de facto government policy. I tend to subscribe to the latter view. I should explain that I think that this has been government policy to acquiesce in their presence, and so I think that it makes sense to provide a pathway toward legal status for people who have done work, have stayed out of trouble, and have paid their taxes. Interestingly, the government seems to the IRS seems to have a pretty good mechanism for making sure that these folks pay taxes, in spite of the fact that the congressional funding for enforcement has really been just for able to apprehend and deport a small fraction of that number. So I think that's the view of legalization. I mean, I do think that that's what I would like to see. But let me answer the question in a different way that may contribute to the discussion. You were asking earlier, and let me just in a way tie this question to the earlier question about sort of what's blocking consensus. I think another reason it's blocking consensus is there's two views of how we ought to move forward and how we ought to deal with the situation we're in and then move forward. One view is that we're really judging, um, we're really trying to either approve or disapprove of people who are here in the country unlawfully. And so this is the view that, that we don't want to give amnesty because it rewards law breaking. This is the view that if someone isn't really American enough, that we wouldn't give them citizenship. It's really almost like a merit badge view or a sort of validation, stamp of approval way of thinking about immigration policy. There's a different way to think about immigration policy, because even if you believe that people who are here in the country unlawfully have broken the law, even if you believe that, and even if you were to disagree with me on that, you might actually also say, you know, that might be the past, but I really think that since we're not apparently going to deport 12 million people, or 11 million people, what is the best way to mobilize, create a vehicle for their contribution positively to American society? That's a very different way of thinking about policy choices. And so I just want to throw that out there, because I think that one of the differences that we have in policy is that kind of trying to decide whether people are worthy in some sense, as opposed to how do we get the most out of people. And you know, I think it leads to different results. It really leads to different results. And so I say that as part of why I'm thinking that even if you believe that people broke the law, what's the best way to have people contribute in the future? And that I think is a different reason why it makes sense to offer a path toward lawful status.
So I don't think that the solution is to deport all these millions of undocumented people here, because there's a lot of efforts from, I think President Obama is one of the presidents who has deported like a very great numbers of, you know, undocumented people to their countries compared to past presidents, and still we are not. That is not a solution. First of all, I think we have to deal with this situation here. I think that the right thing to do is to find a solution, trying to, you know, pass something that is realistic to make these people to have, you know, their documents and being able to contribute to this economy in a greater way. And we're already paying our taxes. Very interesting thing that a lot of the population here, they are undocumented, that's true, but the IRS and the government create this system of giving us an ITIN number, which identifies us as individuals here to be able to go and pay the taxes every single year as a farm workers, as a non-farm workers. How that works, I don't know. Maybe you have the answer, but it's there, and we're paying the taxes. That there are people there still with a lot of fears of being able to go to the IRS and pay their taxes. Definitely, absolutely. There's a lot of people that if we create a system that they get the documents, they will be paying and contributing, not only by paying the taxes, but also by getting other jobs that is available there. And no one wants to take those jobs. They will be taking those jobs and be able to contribute to this economy. This year, last year happens a situation, I don't know, you hear about the unaccompanied children that they came to the USA. A lot of news and a lot of worries and concerns about these children coming to this country without their parents. That is a situation that every single days is happening here. Probably not at the level that it happens brought this alarm that everyone was worried about these children. What is the cause of the roots for these problems? I don't have the exact answers. The only answer I have is that their parents are right here. And these children, the only thing they wanted is to live with their parents. Is that a human thing to do as this country? I think this country America has been based on very important values. And I think that if we follow those values, we're gonna be worried about this population here, and we should be start taking actions on how we can ensure that these people lives out of the shadow, comes out of the shadows, and be safe, because they are part already of this country.
Well, the first rule of solving a problem is do not make the problem worse. And I think that's what we saw with the 1986 amnesty. Illegal immigration increased. There's no reason to believe it wouldn't happen if we did that again. So it's difficult to approach it from any other way. I think beyond that, we have to look at the implications of what we do when we encourage people to come here. It's, according to Amnesty International, 1 out of 6 female illegal immigrants is sexually assaulted on the way here. People are making a difficult trip, and we're encouraging them to do that. We saw that with the border surge of Central Americans. Homicide rates have been high in Central America for ages, and they're, of the 50 cities with the highest homicide rates, only 6 in the 50 highest cities in the world, only 6 are in Central America. There are more in Colombia and Brazil and various places. There are a couple of cities in America that are on that highest list. But after the DACA program, the coyotes told everybody, hey, you're not going to get deported if you make it to the U.S. That led to that surge. So the ones who made it and are now in schools, we hear those stories on TV, and that's a success story. We don't know how many fell off the train on the way, how many were murdered on the way, how many rapes there were on the way. There is an overseas implication to having a lax enforcement policy. So don't make the problem worse. But as to what we do with those who are here now, we have to, if over time the number will diminish if we're enforcing our laws. People will die. Some people will go back. If you look at that graph that was flashed up, I mean, the numbers have been going up the last 3 months, the number of illegal apprehensions at the border. So there's no indication that the number is steady or decreasing. And we need to quit saying that, well, American immigration policy separates families. If someone is deported, I want that individual, deported for being here illegally, I want that individual to take his or her children with him. Why abandon your children in the United States? If they have citizenship, they're entitled to stay here. They're entitled to come back as an adult. But it is not our immigration policy, our immigration enforcement that is separating families. And again, looking at the bigger picture, if we have another amnesty, more people will come, and there'll be a lot of suffering en route.
Herb, correct me if I'm wrong. The question really focused on what do we do with immigration reform, comprehensive, if I understood you correctly, with all of the different groups that are here now, that whether it be children, whether it be producing people that are peers in our society. Is that basically what the question was? Well, as I view this, as I mentioned before, it would be a lot easier if we had one party working together on this. It would certainly take some of it out. Although I will say that in recent history, the Republican Party has not been in that situation. I will say that our current president had a super majority in the Senate and also an overwhelming majority in the House, and really didn't even bring up the issue of immigration to any degree. So let's say that, and clearly there are some very, very difficult and hard decisions to make, no matter who is in control. But they're decisions that have to be made in order to make any kind of reform work. And that means compromises on my way or the highway. And having said that, let's say that we pass it. Is that the ultimate resolution, is passing a law? One of the biggest problems we have in this country today is the selective enforcement of the laws that we have. We have laws on the books with immigration that are clearly not enforced, which have created a problem, but it isn't limited to just immigration. I'll give you one quick example of how this can happen, because my lawyer friend over here and I had a discussion, and he was explaining to me how certain things are cast in concrete and are part of the law. I can give you an incident that we worked on for 8 years in the city of Santa Paula, pretty close by. 2 adults, illegally in the country, they had a job, and they went back to have a party with their friends in Mexico, and the Border Patrol caught them when they were coming back in and said, you can't enter under a law that happened to be one of my amendments about 5 years before to a bill. And so they couldn't get across the border. So what did they do? They hired a coyote. We all know what coyotes do. They got them here. Unbelievably to me, we had the Border Patrol find them, arrest them, and start the process of prosecuting them. They got a fine lawyer, and they had a fine judge. And if you've ever heard the term justice delayed is justice denied, this case was postponed at 4 to 6 month intervals for various reasons. The judge wasn't available, sick, playing golf or something. But in any event, when I left after 7.5 years, this case had never come to trial because of the delays of a sitting judge, which, like my friend told me, says, you know, a judge by law can't rule this way or that way. But isn't he really doing that if he doesn't move the case along and find one way or the other? Anyway, this is a very difficult thing. It would have been solved a long time ago if it wasn't difficult. But unbeknownst to many of my colleagues in Washington, they were sent there to solve some of these problems. I'm no longer running for anything. And while I was there were probably some votes that people didn't like. But I made a pretty good living before I went there. And if I couldn't do what I believed in, I didn't do it. So like it or not everyone is in that situation. It's been an honor to be here today, Herb. Thank you for inviting me.
I don't see how this country can remove some 12 or more million people. Just practically speaking, it would be an impossibility. It would separate families, it separate children from parents, husbands and wives. It's not a vehicle. It can't work. When we look at the people who are in the United States undocumented, they're part of the fabric of our community. They pay taxes, they work, they contribute, they do create wealth. They are part. It would be a tremendous burden on our economy if all of a sudden some 12 million people who were workers, who were purchasers, who were clients, who were everything, all of a sudden disappeared. And also looking at what would happen to the countries that were to receive such large numbers. It's not I don't think it's anybody, in my opinion, not at all a viable idea to have some 12 million people self-deport. I think we have to look at what those people contribute to our country, to our economy, to our local communities, and not overlook that, because they're part and parcel of where we are today.
Well, we're getting toward the end. We have quite a few questions. I've fortunately rephrased a couple of them, but we're not going to have the time to go into those, but our panelists will remain here at least for a little while. You can approach them individually. What I'd like to do, aside from thanking you, by way of finishing up, is to invite from each of the panelists a final comment of not much more than a minute, and there is an option not to say anything, but if there's something that in particular you wanted to leave the audience with to think about, or something you took very vigorous assent or opposition to that was said, now is your opportunity.
Same order? Okay. Okay. A lot to say here. let me actually say something that identifies maybe a point of agreement. Looking back in '86, and Rick talked about how, well, it didn't work, and, we had X number of people in the country illegally then, and now we have, 4X, a much larger number. I think maybe, I don't want to attribute too much agreement to this panel, but it does seem to me that one of the problems with '86 is to put too much stock in legalization. In other words, I personally think legalization is very important, but I also think that the reason that '86 and the reason that merely legalizing people won't solve the problem is because we're going to continue to have a mismatch between the economy and the legal and the lawful immigration system. And so, just as it might have been predicted in 1986 that we would have this conversation almost 30 years later, it would be very unfortunate if Congress, compromised and had some kind of a legalization program, but if part of that legalization program weren't be to rethink some of the lawful categories, because I think we do have to make immigration policy not for ourselves, but for our children's generation. And if we don't do that, then we're kind of captive to these to sort of the short-term politics. And so that's probably the biggest thing I would say, that we got to think of in the second generation. I also think that there's a lot of concern that I certainly share about the effects of immigration on people who are disadvantaged or already here in this country. My own view of that is that the solutions there tend to be in the area of domestic educational policy. I think the depressed wages in this country result from many, many forces, of which immigration is less significant than a lot of the larger forces of globalization. And the last thing I would say is that the longer I've been working on immigration issues, I now realize that I think the 1986 Act Congress passed it in the very first semester I was teaching immigration law at UCLA. It came down in the last, I think became law in the last week of the semester, and I'll never forget that a student raised his hand at the end and said, "Is this going to be on the exam?" But the more I've worked on this field, the more I realize the real solutions have to do with outside of immigration law, with international economic development and with domestic educational policy and the way we treat workers in this country. And if we think that immigration law is going to solve, and is the place where we solve everything, then we're really never going to, get anywhere. And so that's another answer to your question about why it's hard to compromise. I think we need to think bigger, more broadly.
It took my dad almost 20 years to be able to bring his 6 sons to this country. He is a USA citizen, and very successful family. A lot of the family being graduating for the universities. Very proud of them that they are in a job, contributing to this country. And since I got here in 2003, I haven't stopped working. Almost, probably just Sunday, because it's part of the culture of this country. But sometimes even Sundays. A lot of our farm workers, they work from Monday to Sunday, 7 days a week. They are absolutely not like, how do you say, a charge for this country. We're not like something there, not doing anything for the economy. And I just want to do this comment because I think that we have to do something for this population, for these communities. I'm totally stoned, or how can I say, surprised to see the diversity of this country. I have coworkers who are Jewish. When I was coming to this country, people were going to like tourists on my estate. I always see like very tall white people there, and always curious. And I was putting them as just one community. I was not realize how diverse it was, this community, until I got here and I started getting to know this history of this country. And again, I will repeat it. I learned that this country is being built by immigrants, communities, and that's the way it will continue to be, I think. So we should be proactive and see how we're gonna be moving forward with what the situation is right now and creating solutions instead of, you know, be against each other. That's just my own ways of thinking, and I love this country, and I will keep doing my best to contribute in a positive way and through my next generations, my families, and not trying to go into doing bad things, but good things, so we can also be part of the future history of this country. Thank you.
I'm going to come back to the numbers, which I think is a missing part of the immigration debate in general. Could you pull up slide number 7 that I brought? And we've been talking about our immigrant nation, and it's important to realize that there have been periods of U.S. history where we've had high immigration and other periods where we've had low immigration. From 1925 to 1970, immigration to the United States averaged only 200,000. So that's an important part of our history as well. And now we're getting 5 times as many. Here you can see how much of the population growth in the United States is due to immigration, immigrants and their descendants. Going back to 1970, that first Earth Day, U.S. population has increased from 200 million to 320 million, and it's still growing, projected to hit about 420 million by the year 2060. If I could see slide number 6. In California, the growth rate has been even higher. When you look at state population, you also deal with interstate migration, which was a big contributor at an earlier point in our history, like in the 70s, a lot of people moving here from other states. That is no longer the case. We're actually getting a net outflow to other states, and virtually all of the population growth in California over the last 10 years has been from immigration. And the consequence is that we're losing habitat. Slide number 5, please. We've lost 95% of a lot of the different habitat, 85% of the coastal redwoods. And the result is just simply habitat depletion from too many people. So when we're talking about immigration and what do, we need to keep thinking of the numbers and how many people can come here. With 7 billion people on the planet, they can't all come here. And there are many hard cases in Central America and Mexico and elsewhere, but there are a lot of hard cases in Pakistan and Nigeria and Kenya, and not everybody's going to be able to move to California, move to the United States. And one more slide, and I'll let you go if you could pull up slide number 4. And California is known as a hot spot for biodiversity. The only 2% of the Earth's surface has this wonderful Mediterranean climate that we have. And so we have a huge number of endemic species here. And we've lost a large number. A lot of them are under threat. And we have to ask ourselves how many people can live here. And probably you've heard about California's drought. Kevin Starr, the preeminent state historian, said, well, quite frankly, Mother Nature did not intend for 40 million people to live in this area. But it's 40 million and it's going up. So let's look at the numbers as well.
How many here from Ojai? We have how many not from Ojai that have come in? Well, that's pretty good. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Tom Kraus and Chautauqua, Esther Wachtel, who called me a couple months ago. You know, civic engagement is a critical part of the process, whether it be immigration or whether it be fracking or whether it be any number of other things. I think a greater threat to our country is not the immigration issue, it's not the fracking issue, it's the apathy issue. And the people in this community have never been accused of being apathetic. Believe me, I have the scar tissue to prove it. That's a good thing. And I will tell you, it's been a pleasure to be up here with these gentlemen today. And I've always found that I learn more from people I disagree with than the people I agree with. Thank you so much, and keep the faith.
Just very briefly, what I think will happen soon, depending on the decision on the DAPA case, in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. If that injunction is lifted, millions of people will be in non-deportable status. That will change the equation going forward. Then I think comprehensive immigration reform will be a viable option, because that one step will solve the problem of so many undocumented people who are part of our community. And I look forward to that, and I look forward to the decision from the court. Thanks.
Didn't hear it. Did you hear the question? I didn't understand it. I'm sorry. Can we take that question offline when we're done? Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to talk with you individually, and I'm sure our panelists are as well. So first, I want to thank our panelists for coming here. We didn't pay anybody a fee to come here. People volunteered. Some drove from quite a distance. Yeah, sorry. But we really do appreciate it. Our next event is June the 7th. The subject is income inequality. I guarantee you a working microphone system. If you have feedback about this, please let us know. We read your comments carefully and take them into account. If there are other things that you'd like to do, please let us know. If you would like to sign up on our email list, there's a place in the back to do that. Please stay for the reception that we have prepared for you and an opportunity to talk with our panel in person, one-to-one. And lastly, I'd like to thank Andy Gilman, Kit Stoltz, and the committee that put this together. They really put a lot of time and effort. Thank you for coming.